Good evening, folks. Could I call the House to order, please? And I call the Record Secretary to read the minutes, please.
An ordinary public business meeting of the College Historical Society took place on the 11th of November 2009 with Patrick Gagan in the chair. The motion, fittingly enough for a society historically made up of unionists and commies, was Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. Bent double under volumes of World War I for dummies from stacks, coughing like hags, the Hist cursed through sludge, till on mid-term exams they turned their backs, and towards a hastily got-together Remembrance Day debate began to trudge. Men marched asleep. Meanwhile, I actually was asleep, so I'm going to do with these minutes much as New Labour does with Just Cause for invading sandy places. I'll make shit up and come up with an exit strategy on my feet. In what turned out to be a strange debate, people were queuing up to talk about dying for fatherlands other than their own. Noted Protestant Stephen Buggy tried to avoid getting a bad reaction from the crowd for his rabid English nationalism by giving much of his speech in Old English. Sadly, Stephen's conclusion, "Rule ye olde Britannia, Britannia I rulen ye Waveson," the fooled nobody. Continuing the pro-Brit trend, Anthony MacDonald was overcome with an irrational desire for the Falklands War, displaying a lesser-known variant of the Oedipus complex in which he desires to kill Argentines and marry Baroness Thatcher. Hate that. Mark Carney suggested that the army should pick up the pieces of politicians. Mark spent the Berlin Wall celebrations sulking that he could never achieve his ambition of being party chief of Hungary. And any of you who didn't do Junior Cert English might have been wondering where the motion actually came from. I did some research. It originates in an ode of Horace. Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori, mors et fugasem persequitur virum, which translates as, "It is sweet and proper to die for one's country. We're here. Our culture makes no distinction between straight and queer. Get used to it. Go Romans." There being no further business, the meeting adjourned.
Thank you very much for that entertaining account. I'm so sorry I missed that last debate. It sounded really good. But that being so, are there any objections to me signing these minutes as a true and accurate account of the last public business meeting? There be none, I will duly sign. Thank you.
You're all very welcome to the debate this evening. The motion for tonight is that this House believes that the Catholic Church has hindered Ireland's social progress. I'd just like to introduce all the guests. First of all, in the chair, Dr. John Scally, who's from the Theology Department in Trinity College Dublin. Councillor Mannix Flynn, who's a writer and politician. Dr. Brennan Purcell from the School of Philosophy in UCD. The order of business for tonight will be that all student speeches are 7 minutes in length, the first minute and the last minute of which are protected. You will hear a bell after the first minute and so on. Guest speeches will be between 10 and 12 minutes in length, and again you'll have the chance to make a point of information in between the two bells. In order to make a point of information, you can stand up and say quite loudly a point of information so that the guest or the speaker can hear you. They don't need to take you, and when you do take a point of it, you are given the opportunity to make a point of information, keep it short and to the point. Bella has an oratory return sheet in it with lots of mistakes, such as the fact that we are not sponsored by A&L Good Buddy anymore. But while we apologise for that, if you look on the inside, there is a ranking score, and you can rank the student speeches between 0 and 100. It is kind of like debate X Factor, which is apparently the hip thing that all the kids are into these days. Not debate idol, as we used to like to call it. At the end of the year, all the aggregate of everybody's speech is added together, and the people with the highest average are eligible to win a gold medal, a silver medal, or a mark of thanks. So with that, I'd like to just put it back to the chair to begin the debate.
Thank you very much, Auditor, and delighted to be here in, what do you call it, debate idol, is it now, or X Factor? Debate X Factor, excellent, okay. So on that note, can I welcome the first speaker for the proposition, Fintan Mallory.
Ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to start this somewhat differently. Oisin has just returned, and he is speaking to St. Patrick. You who are bent and bald and blind, with a heavy heart and wondering mind, have known 3 centuries poets sing of dalliance with a demon thing. And Oisin continues, and he discusses his adventures through beautiful lands, with love unrestrained, with passion, with beauty, and with nobility. And he returns, and we sang of loves and angers without sleep, with all the exultant labours of the strong, but now the lying cleric's murder song, with barren words and flatteries of the weak. In what land do the powerless turn the beak of ravening sorrow, or the hand of wrath? For all your croziers, they have left the path and wander in the storms and clinging snows, hopeless forever. Ancient Oisin knows, for he is weak and poor and blind, and lies on the anvil of this world. And we have a world of penitence, of apology, in which life is no longer justification for life, in which you have to appeal beyond that to something more. I don't expect everyone in the proposition having to take this exact line and running with it. And I will then get on to the very end, in which Patrick speaks on the flaming stones without refuge. The limbs of the Fenians are tossed. None warn the masters of hell who could break up the world in their rage, but kneel and wear out the flags and pray for your soul that is lost, though the demon lover of this youth and its godless, passionate age. Now I'm going to get on to the actual speech. I will be dealing through this here. Before I get into any of the more specific details on how social progress, I believe, has been hindered, I would like to just clearly separate being Irish from Catholicism, because something has been built up over many years in which we have had this in the past Yeatsian notion that has now been usurped by Kavanagh, in which we have had a church that has insisted that we be like children, that have been shameless merchants of shame, and have inculcated in us, because I believe many of us here probably have problems questioning the authority of the church. I, for one, still find it awkward talking to priests, and I know many lovely priests. I will get and deal with that there a bit later, but we still have a kind of Stockholm syndrome to the church, and I would like to address that and sacrifice myself in a full frontal attack on Catholicism here in this here first proposition. I believe that in many ways the Catholic Church have somehow stood in the way of most progresses in the history of this nation. They went from opposing Fenianism, excommunicating people that were members of the Irish Republican Brotherhood. Well, I'm not a big fan of them, anything. But we had, in the 1890s, within years of each other, the 2 greatest Irishmen, in a way that ever lived, Parnell and Wilde, brought down by the same kind of hypocrisy that the Church still perpetrates to this day. This hypocrisy based on absurd notions of, no, I won't take you that, of what it is natural sexually. And I would also like, before I get on to actually discussing this issue of social progress, not yet, Kieran, because I heard it mentioned earlier on today, a kind of myth that we Irish like oppression and we kind of somehow need the church. And yes, sure, we like to define ourselves against oppression. That's not the case. We do not rely on the church for our sense of identity. And also I'd like to say as well, because I mentioned I know many nice priests, I also know many lovely Franciscans, and I know that some speakers here might know some lovely Jesuits, and that's probably the case. And I want to say that it's not... I don't hate the sinner, I hate their sins. They can have that patronizing thing given to them too. And I'm not trying to say that being a member of the Catholic Church is entitled to its beliefs. I will merely be arguing that its beliefs have not served Ireland very well. I think I mentioned briefly there about how throughout the 19th century the Catholic Church has been one of the great institutions of oppression in this country. At the beginning of the 20th century, though, we got rid of one of the two, the other great institution of oppression, and Ireland was given its own state. And up north, where I come from, you had all those wonderful slogans, home rule is Rome rule. And despite their somewhat dubious work beforehand, the Catholic Church truly embraced the idea of the Irish Free State, and they made, quite frankly, they turned home rule into Rome rule. What we got instead of freedom was a somewhat quasi-fascistic backwater. We had God in the Constitution, women in the kitchen. We had a divorce made illegal. We had these are just specific instances. We had the Catholic Church passing on lists of books to be censored. Some of the greatest Irish writers of all times were on those lists of books that the Catholic Church had censored. We had also, the Church, as I was saying, they tend to be acting in their best interests. So we had, from the pulpit, a lot of the specific harms of the Catholic Church come in a rather intangible fashion, in which I'm not necessarily going to point to individual instances, because a lot of this comes from what has come through the pulpit over the years. So you had in that support of the blue shirts, in which the church would contravene in a way what I personally would consider to be, or what many good Catholics I know would consider to be the beliefs of what Christianity is about. But in the same way that they oppose liberation theology, they oppose many great developments in Irish society. Earlier on I mentioned this issue of hell being brought up and the fear of that. And I've got friends from other European countries that come to Ireland, and they would go almost as a bit of a show. In the same way you go to Riverdance, they go, "Here, I want to hear an Irish Catholic sermon." And they would go to that there. I have friends, numerous, that feared hell from an early age. And we've got people, we've got entire... yes, actually, I'll take you this now, Colm.
Surely, like what you're talking about in terms of like the moral codes and fear of damnation is something that happens in most societies, not ones where the predominant religion is Catholicism.
I wouldn't say so, actually. For one thing, hell's a largely Christian notion. It isn't there in Judaism, and most Protestant denominations don't have the same kind of obsession of hell that the Irish Catholic Church has it. Okay, now I'm going to get down to the specific tangible harms. I'm sure this will be brought up and elaborated on by many speakers that come up here. Mother and child policies in the 50s, obviously being opposed by the Church. The Church's opposition to contraception. We have Mother Teresa touring this country. I know it's somehow, you're not meant to attack Mother Teresa. I'm going to do it for Pete's sake. I'm the first speaker here. She toured the country preaching against divorce. Therefore, if you're a woman and you're being abused by your husband, no, you're not getting a divorce. It contravenes a moral code. I think we have to get over our fear of questioning the authority of the church, and we have to say whether, if these ideals were upheld by a political party, would we vote for that political party? I don't think that most people in this room would actually vote for that political party. We've had them pontificating about what is natural in a relationship between two people, influencing legislation on who people can love and can't love. So, quite frankly, all the best aspects of religion, the beauty we can achieve without the church, morality. I think I've listed things here many people consider immoral, but have been endorsed by the Catholic Church, therefore clearly showing that we don't necessarily derive morality from religion. And community, well, for Pete's sake, we've got the GAA. So, we got half of our independence at the beginning of the century. We're halfway there. Let's stop living on a prayer, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm delighted to propose this motion. Thank you.
Chairperson, Mr. Auditor, ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society, ladies and gentlemen. We've heard a little bit from Fintan there, and he set up the debate quite nicely. He defined what he thought was social progress, things like the mother and child scheme, gay marriage, abortion, divorce, contraception. I agree broadly, you can consider those social progress. He also said that Catholicism is basically inherently ugly. I disagree with that. I think that there are an awful lot of things that Catholicism has brought to society, and certainly an awful lot of moral codes that Colm brought up. I think that things like, the Good Samaritan, things like, loving the tax collector, associating with lepers, associating with those removed from society, things like, forgive them for they know not what they do, things like the Ten Commandments, things like the Golden Rule, some things that are brought to society by the Catholic Church and by other religions. But that's okay. Basically, I'm saying that there are some good things to the Catholic Church as well, and that's it's not just bad things. But I do think that obviously there are some bad things. So I think the other thing is that this debate, I hope we can confine it to official policies of the Catholic Church. I don't think, for instance, it was an official policy to abuse people in the Catholic Church. I think that those people that did are obviously should be punished, should rightly be called out as shameful, and I'll take you in a second on this. I think that if we stick to the official lines, that's where we'll define where actually the Church affected it. Yeah.
Was it de facto policy of the Church to cover up institutional abuse?
I don't think it was a de facto policy. I think, yes, many people did, but I think that that is people failing rather than the Church failing. I think if the Church had a policy to say that we will cover up abuse, then that would be the Church failing. But I think that the fact that it was people doing it as opposed to the Church doing it as an institution, then that it was people failing. But I'm willing to concede that, yes, the Church did fail in that as well. Okay, let's talk about a little bit how secularism should work, because secularism is something that obviously the proposition espouses the church shouldn't have much input into policy. I think the church should have as much input as any other lobby group. I don't think it should have any more. But the way that they want to separate politics from, say, religion is by saying that you shouldn't bring your religious beliefs to the table. That's fine. I don't think your religious beliefs are necessarily brought to the table when you are a Catholic. I think that the way religion works is that you are infused with certain beliefs, that you believe these things from your moral codes, and these rather than saying these are your beliefs, they rather inform your beliefs and can have the ability to transform your lives. I think that when you are able to translate these values into universal principles and apply these universal principles, like say respect for life, like say, I don't know, respect for the unborn, respect for society, things like, I don't know, the value of the family, or say the value of, and I don't agree with this, but say the value of a marriage between a man and a woman. I'm saying that in this case, when you translate those values into universal values, you aren't doing any harm, because you are saying these are values that other people can associate with. Yes?
Yes, you are. Just because a Catholic believes that divorce is bad, it doesn't mean that everybody else you have to be abiding by those.
Yeah, absolutely fine. I totally agree, and that's my next point. That the next point is that we heard that there's a problem with saying that when you believe these things, you shouldn't try to influence other people. Like, God forbid, if I think that, say, slavery is wrong, but you don't think slavery is wrong, like, say, I don't know, millions and millions of people, the majority of people in the world, morals are relative in that regard, but if you think slavery is wrong, then you have a duty to prevent slavery. If you think slavery is wrong, then you have a duty to persuade me that slavery is wrong. If you think that, say, killing people is wrong, then you have a duty to persuade me that killing people is wrong, to prevent me from killing people. If you think that abortion is wrong, because you think abortion is killing people, then you have an absolute moral duty to persuade me that abortion is wrong. I think that the Catholic Church in this regard hasn't so much said, no, this is against our Catholic beliefs, therefore we should all oppose it. I think the Catholic Church, its primary duty is obviously saving souls. They think that the way to save more souls is by saying that by killing people, you are harming these souls. I won't take you. Sorry, I've taken a few. I may take somebody else later on. But what I'm saying is that by allowing these things to happen, if they were to say for abortion, they believe that is killing people. They believe that you are allowing people to be killed if you legalize abortion. It is their duty, as any other lobby group should, to oppose abortion in society. It is their duty, say, for divorce, and we've heard that divorce is social progress, that their duty is therefore to say that divorce isn't necessarily good for society. No, thank you. If they believe that parents should bring up their children together in a family, or that letting a marriage fail in the first 5 years is bad, that they think that that's not good for society, then it's their duty to say, I oppose this. Furthermore, no thank you. Furthermore, I think that if they didn't do this, it'd be really bad. If you had a moral opposition to abortion or divorce or contraception, and these are all defendable. There isn't a single issue on the table that lots of people, or that is universally opposed. I'll take you in a second, Kate. That is universally opposed. There are plenty of studies that say abortion, divorce, contraception, and things like that are bad. Not contraception in the AIDS condoms. Go for it.
Do you not think there's a difference between trying to persuade someone of something that's clear to appear, and someone in a position of authority stating something to someone who might not have another point of comparison?
No, I don't particularly think that there's obviously a difference. I don't particularly think that it's illegitimate, though. I think that when you have this power, if you believe it, you have a duty to tell other people that you believe it. But furthermore, as I said at the start, I don't think that people say, therefore, that's the Catholic Church's, or the Catholic Church says that condoms are wrong, therefore I won't ever use a condom. I think that people use that belief. It infuses their beliefs. They take that on board and then they believe that. I don't think they say, well, the Catholic Church says gay marriage is wrong, therefore I think gay marriage is wrong. And I think it'd be a little bit bad to say that. I think also that the church is a little bit slow to change its mind. I think that's kind of legitimate. But I think that when we're talking about social progress, we have to realise that it's society progressing as well at the same time. That we say divorce is now common, and we've heard it as an example of social progress. Well, divorce wasn't accepted 100 years ago. Divorce wasn't accepted 50 years ago. There wasn't a single person, or there was hardly a single person in Ireland that was arguing for divorce 50 years ago. Social progress wouldn't have been legalising divorce then. Social progress is only legalising divorce when society catches up with it. And we can say that society is oppressed by the Catholic Church and told that, well, we shouldn't believe in it because it's a bad thing or something. Like you can say the church says that, but I think that like abortion only came into existence in the States in 1973. You can't say that the church is opposing social progress by saying, well, abortion wasn't legalized sooner or abortion isn't legalized, because it's not necessarily something that our society has come to terms with. And until society comes to terms with something, it's stupid to say that this is social progress. It's only social progress when society uses its beliefs to get over the fact. I think politicians are failing in this regard. I think politicians should have stepped up to the mark and said, no, I disagree with the Catholic Church and I'll take a stance against it. I think we've got a lot of gutless politicians out there. I do, however, believe that the majority of the Catholic Church's beliefs are for good. They believe them. They believe they're trying to save souls. I think that they're not hindering social progress, but rather they're promoting their vision of saving souls and at the same time persuading lots of people. If they can persuade those people to change their minds, then social progress is not what it's defined as. If they are able to prevent people from changing their minds, then that's the social norm at the time. Ladies and gentlemen, I move to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. And now our second speaker for the proposition, William Quill.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Auditor, ladies and gentlemen, I like a lot of Thomas's speech. I mean, I like the idea that civil society groups put forward what they really believe and try to get their beliefs across, try to affect policy changes. But that's not what the debate is. The debate before us isn't, do we believe the Catholic Church was true to its own beliefs? The debate is, was the Catholic Church a force, did it hinder social progress? Suppose, for argument's sake, the Catholic Church suppose we accept, and as mostly relatively liberal people here, but even if you're not, suppose for argument's sake you accept that divorce, marriage equality, abortion, equality in employment and other things define social progress. And the Catholic Church, as a civil society group, if that's the way Thomas is trying to portray it in a speech, is speaking against these things. Well, therefore, on that definition, it is socially regressive. It doesn't really matter how sincere they are in those beliefs. Now, I just want to go... No, thanks. I just want to go back and try to remember before the foundation of the state what the Catholic Church's view was. How would you react to... just getting into it. No, I'll take it here on.
Don't you in that case have to show that each of the things that the Catholic Church, or most of the things
I know, I
the
do.
Church slows down, is a good thing?
Yes, I know I do. What I was really just trying to get at the whole basis of Thomas's speech, that it wasn't really relevant to what we're discussing. I'm not saying irrelevant, but that isn't really the crucial point of what comes before us here. To go back to the attitude of the Roman Catholic Church towards the family, and this idea that it is pro-family. And take example. I will go through examples of how it was anti-family, and how an interesting case was during the 1913 lockout. There were a number of well-minded, educated people who had the money, had the resources to fund the children of those in the lockout, to send them to Wales, so that whatever the rights and wrongs of the strike, and the people in this group mainly decided not to state their position, that the children would not suffer, that they could go to Wales to get. I'll take you in a minute, Thomas. And so the Catholic Church opposed this. Not just said this was wrong because they could be under Methodist or atheist families, but actually Catholic mobs from the Ancient Order of Hibernians came and stopped allowing parents to send their children to Wales so they could get food for the few weeks of the strike. Thomas.
Well, in fairness, that's just a little bit misguided. Like, we're talking about really big issues, not like 1930 lockout. We're talking about abortion, contraception, divorce, gay marriage.
Okay, yeah, fine, Thomas. I'll get on to these things then. Okay, well, it's what I don't get about the Catholic Church sometimes. I mean, it's an obvious thing, but often, most of the time, I don't think about the Church, and then I kind of think, what is their problem with the idea of love? Why is love only right, or the expression of love only right when it's consecrated by a priest and in the act of marriage? Why is every other side of that a sinful act? And then when you couple that with the fact this is something which they set out to deny themselves, those two coupled together, and the result of that had on their institution, and the fact that no thanks, and the effect that this had on their priesthood, in terms of how that when you had a priesthood denying themselves this and end up being repressed and which led to the institutional abuse in a way. And then, on the other hand, using this to condemn anyone, the idea that they condemned those who, because of their own love lives, or those of their parents even, that they were seen as inferior citizens. And I don't really care that their influence was popular. That this was something that people, because we don't say absolve a political party from responsibility, or anyone who finds a voice. Like, you can think of people like worldwide and demagogues who get support. We don't absolve them of responsibility for what they say simply because they get popular support. They are an influence, and people are responsibility for further influence. And then we have to consider them as part of this system. We can talk about the fact that the state was also responsible for this, and then the state has accepted responsibility. But when it came to compensation for institutional abuse, in no way could you say that the state's responsibility was nine times that of the church. So even if the church has acknowledged some of its responsibility there, it is still part of that. And we can say that, yes, we didn't block social progress because there weren't these demands for divorce or contraception until much later. For starters, there were some, but if we didn't live in a system which the church was part of, and we can't absolve them of this part. They were part of this system where people were oppressed, where there was this collusion between the police, between schools, between the courts, that the church was right, that those who convicted of minor misdemeanors, if they were sent to institutions, and civil servants have much responsibility for this, judges do, but the church does as well, for being part of that system. And what I was going to say. Yes.
Divorce came in when the people voted for divorce.
Yes.
And there was nothing that the church could do about it.
Yes.
They did not set policy. The state ultimately responsible.
Okay. Well, on divorce, it was something which they had that influence. I'm not. This isn't just about divorce. It's about the fact that the culture that allowed divorce, that allowed discussion about issues like divorce. We had divorce really up until sometime in the 1920s, which was just in some ways accepted. But what happened in the meantime was the Catholic Church was part of a culture that disallowed proper discussion of these issues, of these many issues. And so this isn't about religion. This isn't about people's beliefs. It is about the church as something that was part of a system, something that had an influence, that they're responsible for that influence, and for the fact that their hypocrisy in covering up. And as I mentioned in the point to Thomas, the hierarchy did do this. It wasn't just a few people in there. This is something the hierarchy knew about. The extent of it isn't really important. They knew that it happened at times, so that as in general, what I'm trying to say is you can't absolve them just because the people supported them, but given the culture of the time, and in any case because of the strength of their influence. Thank you.
Very much, Mr. Chairperson, Mr. Auditor, ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society, ladies and gentlemen. I'm approaching this motion from possibly a slightly different background, in that I am possibly the only person in this room who is a Catholic born to atheists, pretty vitriolic atheists at that, who attempted to be excommunicated from the church and who managed to get expelled from a variety of different schools because they didn't follow the Catholic faith, which was an achievement in itself, and I'm proud to be of that heritage, but I obviously believe that the Catholic Church is a force for good, and I think an overall force for good. So do forgive me if I have possibly a slightly odd view of this entire topic. I'd also like to just back Thomas up, essentially, in like a gesture of respect. William said that a lot of his points were irrelevant, and then tried to say that he didn't say that at all, but he did. I would say that they were relevant, because what Thomas brought you today was an idea that the Catholic Church was putting forward a vision of different social progress. That it wasn't that it was hindering social progress, it was what we believe from our own vantage point today to be different to social progress. And within that he said that things like abortion, divorce, and contraception are all debates that we can still have today. They are all things that we still have to discuss as to whether or not they are things we believe to be socially progressive or socially regressive. It's not clean and clear-cut when we say, well, I agree with things different to the church, and therefore the church is a force for bad. No, the church is just a different voice to you. Go on, Jamie.
That's fine, except they didn't engage in the debate in a rational way. Instead, they brainwashed kids, and then they said it was sinning when they went against the church policy.
I can understand why people have this idea that the brainwashing occurred, because I understand that the church did fill in the role of, taking over the education of people, and they did have a huge amount of influence, possibly an inordinate amount of influence. But just in relation to this brainwashing, how was it if they were such a strong force and a strong cultural force? Like, what was it that meant that we could break out of it? How is it that today we are sitting here or standing here talking about divorce, which is now legal, talking about abortion, which we now think is possible, talking about contraception, which is now legal? If the church had such a stranglehold on Irish culture and Irish society, it's a miracle in that case that we, no thank you, it's a miracle in that case that we, no thank you, that we managed to escape in this way. I don't think the church brainwashed to the extent that we allow ourselves to believe. And this is a large reason or a large difficulty that I have. I think that we as a nation tend to lay our own national sins at the feet of the church because the church did have an amount of power. I think that we hide our own national homophobia behind the guise of the Catholic Church. And I think the Catholic Church has gotten an awful lot of bad press because it held proudly the views that we as a nation still quietly hold, and as a silent majority still quietly hold. So I think that these things, this opposition, as it were, to homosexual marriage, I don't think that that stems from the Catholic Church. I think that stems from the people. And because the Catholic Church is a force that proposes that it is a bad thing and proposes that homosexuals shouldn't get rights, then we hide behind them and we hide behind that. Go.
The views of people in Ireland in the past were bad and moral. They were responsible for those views. The Catholic Church held those views and is equally as responsible for those bad views.
You claim the views of previous generations were bad and immoral, and what Thomas actually brought to you today was that in the large majority of those instances, no, they're not bad or immoral. You might believe that they're bad or immoral, but they aren't themselves. The only instance where that could be a case, or where you could say, yes, it is bad and yes, it is socially regressive, is I would say, in relation to homosexual rights, which I would say most people here think is fine. I think that in that situation, like, it is possible that the church stood in the way of what we believe to be social progress, but I think that's just because everyone here agrees that it is socially progressive. But I don't think that that's the case. I think that the church has a different vision of social progress, and that there are still people amongst us who believe that to be socially progressive, myself included, in a number of situations. And I would like to point out that William's entire, and what you were echoing there, was that, it doesn't matter that it was popular. Like, there was collusion, and how much collusion is necessary for us to realise that it wasn't the Catholic Church that was hindering social progress, but it was just, the Catholic Church wasn't that which hindered social progress. Social progress didn't happen because we weren't at a stage where it was ready, because it wasn't the progress that we were making at the time. We were making progress in other areas, and now we are at a stage where we were making progress in the areas we're discussing today. Like, you could claim that any significant player in the past hindered social progress because you can't have it here and now and putting forward social progress. So it simply doesn't make sense to be quite so vitriolically opposed to something that is a part of the past. Go on.
Such nonsense. The value system that we have now is because of the Catholic Church. If it's changing, it's because the Catholic Church is less powerful.
The value system that we have now is because of the Catholic Church. The value system that we have now, where we have views that are so totally different from the Catholic Church, is what you're saying. Like, these are views that stem from the Catholic Church. That doesn't make any sense. I understand where you're coming from when you're saying we are now moving forward and the Catholic Church has hindered us. I don't think that's the case, because I think we have been moving forward the entire time, and we're now at a place where we're saying 60 years ago the Catholic Church wasn't doing what we want to be having done now. I'm saying 60 years ago, it was 60 years ago, and they did make social progress, and they did make advances, and we did make advances. And I think that an important part of that is the element where the Catholic Church did foster a sense of acceptance. And I know that sounds incredibly bizarre and incredibly strange, but Thomas brought it up on an individual rather than an aggregate level. The Church did propound or did expound views that we still hold true and we still hold as important in our society, and things that still act as a positive force for social progress and social goodness. And I think that we should accept that those are important aspects of the society we have built today and do contribute incredibly valuably to social progress. And those are the ideas that he brought forward that I think a lot of people would generally laugh at. That you should, befriend the individuals who are otherwise shunned by society. Like, I think that that stems from the Catholic Church, and I think that that is good for social progress. That we should take care of the weaker members. I think that that is also, continued and propagated by the Catholic Church, and I think it's something that we need to thank them for. Like, we need to accept the fact that they have done a huge amount. And Niamh brought it up in a point of information. The people who put the Catholic Church in the position of power, we now condemn them for holding, and we now condemn them for lobbying for. The people who put them into that situation of power was the state who chose not to do that. The state didn't take on the responsibilities that it was meant to take on, and the church simply filled a void in that regard. And I think that then when we say they have power, therefore they were bad, you can't make it quite so simple. We were all the individuals, or we are born of all of the individuals who had a stake in this society. And if you think the society is backward, I would say it's because the society was in the past, and it had nothing to do with that. I don't think that the church prevented social progress. I think that social progress happened, and I think that now we think that social progress is something different to what it was at the time. And for these reasons, I beg to oppose.
Thank you very much, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. It is a great honour to be here. As was said, that I began a career here many years ago in players, and it's great to be here to discuss this issue. And while I've heard a number of speakers talk about faith in the Catholic Church and its history, it's important to note here what we are discussing, and the motion is that this House believes that the Church has hindered social progress. It doesn't give a time as to whether it's the past, it's the now, or it's into the future. So, what is the evidence to suggest that now that we can actually look at this and believe, as I believe, that it has hindered that progress? Well, the reason why I would believe that is that I'm going to take it down to a specific thing, and I'm just going to deal with the phenomena, of not faith, of not church, but of the issues relating to the residential institution and the way the church hindered the justice issues and all of the issues that it so promotes around these single issues, and that by and large this perpetration was against women and children, the most vulnerable. We have all the evidence. The evidence is this, is that in the recent years, the Catholic Church indemnified itself against any justice or any authority trying to bring it into a court to hold it collectively responsible as a church for the abuses that took place in 150 institutions that more or less were perpetrated on possibly in the region of 150,000 individuals. The examples are these, and I'm just going to give you a series of clear examples. And I think it's important to know this, that personally I have a very strong faith. It is not based on an institutionalized church, and it is not based on any one individual. It is based between me and a God or a power of my choice. So it's important to know that I'm not coming here as an anti-Catholic. I'm simply coming here to debate the issue that progress has been halted and hindered by that. And in a hindrance, I mean a deliberate act of hindrance, that somebody would hinder your passage. Recently, in the last 10 years, a group of bodies were dug from a grave in a place called Grace Park Road from a congregation of religious nuns. The women in question were 164 bodies. The bodies were dug up and placed into coffins. In those coffins were 64 women with no birth certificates, no death certificates, or no cause of death. Nobody in the Catholic Church chose to actually inquire as to who these people were. They were quickly brought across the city and they were burned in Glasnevin. The very basis of Catholicism is to call me by my name. You're given a name and you're identified. So there's a great failure and a hindrance. Imagine today a family in search of a mother that there's no record of. There's no record of. And the reason why there's no record of this, not even in mystery, is because the Catholic Church, along with their buddies in the state, decided that this would be done quietly. And why did they do that? The reason why they did that was for profit, because they were selling off the land. That's the reason why they did that. On the issues in relation to residential institutions, here's what happened when you believe in faith. We were told by the state and by the church that they were deeply sorry for having offended for trespassing, that they were deeply sorry and they begged forgiveness, that they wanted to hear that they failed in their duty. They failed to hear us. They never attempted to hear us. They failed to heed or to hear our pain. They inflicted pain. They were never there to hear it. They were there to inflict it. When you went in to meet them, you're those who you accused, who, in by and large, were defended by the church, having given the apology and said, we are very sorry. When you went into the courts, you were met by a sea of indifferent barristers who called you a liar, and because they had indemnified the church, had to defend the church. So this was the situation that was met by you. So the progress, was it hindered? Well, we're still in a place where the vast majority of the hierarchy of the Catholic Church believed that the rape of a child over a long period of time, sustained, was a moral failing. Yet that same church, when it found any of its civilian workers in doing such actions to children, informed the police. But it never informed on its own. That's what it didn't do. It didn't do those situations. And hindered this, and here's where the big hindrance is, that globally, what we're facing into the future is all of the allegations, and a lot of them being founded, of what the congregations of religious perpetrated across the globe on individuals in terms of slavery. The Magdalene women were not paid one single penny. They were detained unlawfully and illegally. Now, people can suspend their brains and say, okay, worse would have happened to them. What worse could happen to you than your child being taken over, that you'd never see it again, and that you'd be given no quarters? No quarters. The same situation has to be said of those who were in the congregations themselves, those who joined the congregations, hoping against hope that they were going to do service, that they were going to do great work, because that's the vast majority of them. And what they were also betrayed by a hierarchy of men. Remember that the women, the female congregations, were told, people who are doing good works, like Catherine McCauley, were told by the Catholic hierarchy at the time, desist from this work or we lock you up. On the other hand, make it into a convent and a congregation and we let you flourish. So as we stand today, we have a situation at the moment where what I've seen is we have a diocesan report. And here's the sting in the tail. The diocesan report deals with those who were abused in the schools and by and large in the hospitals by priests. There is extremely clear evidence, that the Catholic Church, when they knew about these issues, deliberately hindered the Garda Síochána in their investigations, deliberately protected the perpetrators of these, and an incident sent them on to other places to perpetrate these crimes. And now we have a situation where it's being hindered even further by the courts in order to delete the situation. Here's the great kick in this tail. You have 18 congregations of religious, who I believe by and large went out to do good work, which are the congregations of religious that were in charge of the residential institutions. And somewhere along the line, it got destroyed, and it got corrupted, and it got hindered, and it became evil, and it became criminal, and crimes were committed. And at the end of the day, recently it all came out on top with the Rome report and this. Did the Catholic Church, did Archbishop Martin, or did Rome even turn to its own who had perpetrated the crimes, or those who were helpless, and say to them, we give you solace, we will help you get through this? No, it didn't. It turned its back on its own, and it hindered them. Because I work with congregations of religious, I work with nuns and brothers who are completely dismayed that they've been hung out to dry by the very church and the very hierarchy that they seek to serve. So this is what's happened. So do we have progress? Have we been hindered? Well, the only true real debate that's happened in relation to this issue is this one here. But did the Catholic Church hinder us? Yes, it did. Is it continuing to hinder us? Yes, it will. It's very, very interesting that Dermot Martin and the bishops managed to get themselves around the survivors of children abuse just when their own report was about to come out. Just when their own report was about to come out. That they are the arbitrators of forgiveness. That they are the arbitrators of those who want to atone. Did they hinder us? Here's the situation. I am 52 years of age. I was sent to all of the institutions. Okay? I ended up in all the prisons. I ended up pleading with these individuals, man to man, person to person, with strong faith, and I do have strong faith, and they offered me the Our Father. And when I asked them to hand me over documents or to accept what had happened, they refused point blank. So the screaming continues. Ireland will pay an enormous price for the fact that we allowed the Catholic Church over generations and in the present to hinder any sense of justice, to hinder any sense of social progress. What's really interesting now, that recently I was listening to a radio program, and I heard that what was once the Congregations of Religious, which used to be, I think the spokesman was Father Sean Healy, has now changed its name. So not only is the Catholic Church willing to hinder any social progress, it's also willing to betray you at a moment's notice in order to protect its wealth and its standing. So social progress absolutely has been hindered by the Catholic Church. Because at the end of the day, you cannot go to your God without actually taking ownership of your lies, your untruths, and your evil deeds. And these, at the end of the day, are moral individuals. They're individual men and women. And they perpetrated such acts that at the end of the day, this society, Irish society, will be shamed forevermore when it's all calculated on a global level. There's over 150,000 cases in America pending against congregations of religious. We heard the recent issues in relation to Australia, and there's yet more to come. They will turn and they will look to Ireland, the very place where all of these people set out to do good work. But among them there were wrongdoers, as there are. But what happened in the hierarchy of the church? The hierarchy of the church decided to protect them at the expense of us all, and at the expense of this here, which is the hindrance of social progress. And there is simply no other finding that you find that this motion to be correct. I'll take any questions that you wish. Thank you very much.
Do you think the fact that we're continuing to point the finger at the Catholic Church, rather than looking at ourselves, and I think failings in society caused the abuses that were coming by the Church, do you think that that hinders further social change if we continue to pass responsibility to someone else?
You must accept that those who are responsible for this action must be responsible. This isn't about blame or dumping. If you're standing on the footpath and there's a car parked on your foot, do you ring up, the people who are in charge of the pavements, or do you actually address the person who's driving the vehicle? This is not about dumping. It's about responsibility. And in the failure of that responsibility, it would rest upon us to make the progress that we've been denied by taking the ownership of it. Because I'm not anti-church, I'm not anti-Catholic, but I can't allow us to be detained at this point. So we are being stopped. So it's not about, honing in on the Catholic Church. Either they're capable of accepting what happened or they're not. Move out of the way, because at the end of the day, we have sufficient belief in ourselves to take this on board. But we can no longer expect them, because they'll hinder us. And I believe that they will hinder us. So it's not about the focus on the Catholic Church. It's about the focus on justice. That's what it's about. The Ryan Report is not worth anything. The Ryan Report is an exercise in nothing. It doesn't hold any weight whatsoever. The evidence in the Ryan Report should have been handed to An Garda Síochána, and it wasn't. The judge took evidence of crime, and the state colluded in that. Remember, it indemnified. So if your child in the future goes to a school and gets brutalised by an individual member of the Catholic Church, what's going to happen? Look at the recent situation that happened down in Colm, when a man didn't go to the guards and went to his bishop. Look what happened. It's no reflection on the faith. It's no reflection on your belief in God. These are mere mortals. Look to what Christ said. Look to what he did. Look to what happened. At the very last moments, hanging on the cross, what was his last words? I've been abandoned. And then he takes more faith and he says, into your hands I command you my spirit. So this is not about faith, this is about this. It's very simple. It's about, did it hinder social progress? Well, if I assault you, and all of us see it, and you come to me and say, Mannix Flynn, why did you assault me? And I deny it. I'm stopping you. I'm stopping you getting a certain amount of freedom. So I'm hindering you.
I cannot in any way defend the church's actions, and I don't think that there are anybody that would, there's anybody that would. But I think that you're a little bit unfairly characterizing the Ryan report in that regard. The issue isn't that the church doesn't want to help, it's that, say if, for example, a priest had a relationship with a woman, and he told his archbishop, what the Ryan report was proposing was that every single thing that the priest told his archbishop will be handed over into the public sphere, not into the private sphere, not into like just the hands of the guardianship only, but rather that everybody and every single issue that was ever brought to the bishop will be handed over. There are certain data rights. I totally agree that every single case of abuse should definitely be put straight into the hands of guardianship under the direction of public prosecutions. But I don't think it's acceptable to say that every single case of information, every bit of information held in every priest in the country is fair to the public.
I do take your point. The point of the matter is this. Had it been the mafia, had it been an organisation, had it been Pol Pot, had it been Joseph Stalin, we would have had a massive inquiry, we'd have had an army marching on it. Remember, we're talking about a kind of a peculiar kind of genocide, an assault on humanity. Okay, it's most vulnerable. The nuns got money from the Labour. The priests, brothers and nuns that went to the institutions got money from the Labour. Nobody sought to go after that money. I do understand everybody's judicial rights. The Ryan report didn't have any legislative rights to go in and demand this information. If a priest wants to have a consensual relationship with a man or a woman, that is their business. I don't have a problem with that whatsoever. But when you're talking about an act of buggery, when you're talking about an act of trespass, when you're talking about a vulnerable child being continuously raped and abused by those in religious, then you have a different matter altogether. When you have files being detained by Rome, by the Catholic Church, another matter altogether. Do you understand me? And they were not handed over. I sat with the congregations of religious. I sat with Brother Gibson. I sat with them. And they denied to me that they had these files. Now, we're only talking here about did they hinder? Did they hinder? We're not talking about your faith. We're not talking about other matters. I'm not interested. I'm interested in this. So I'd ask you to uphold what's being said here, you know what I mean, and not to allow your faith and your belief in God or any of those beliefs to hinder what's here. It's finally obvious. Thank you very, very much indeed.
So I just have to say I agree completely with the opposition or the proposer on this one. I was speaking with someone who represents the communications in our diocese a week ago, and she's a mother with a family. And we were looking at what Dublin Diocese is doing now. I don't quite go with you on Dermot Martin, because I think he came in and he actually disagreed with the previous guy, whom I'd often fought with in UCD about other matters of philosophy. Dermot Martin, I like him as a human being, but he was, as you said, not letting the files out. Dermot Martin, as far as I know, let everything out. And we've now got a lot of things in place. What has happened, and in that we're waiting for a Dublin report, but certainly the terrible things that have happened there, at least now we have things in place. But just to come back to what Mannix has been saying, there's just two things that she asked and that struck me. I mean, one of Mannix's wonderful signatures is Mannix Flynn, human being, which I think is about the finest designation you can give to anybody, and I just enjoyed and admired the way he did it. But I'm a human being too, maybe nothing of the same quality. I haven't suffered anything like Mannix, but I feel exactly the same as he does. But she said, why didn't they go to the guards? And that's the problem that I have. In other words, when someone is broken, canon law has a quite clear statement in 1923 about the things you mentioned, like buggery, for example, of children or whatever. And they're incredibly severe things within the church. So they can't say they didn't know about it. Why didn't they go to the police? And secondly, the question of accountability. If I'm an accessory after the fact of something that's gone wrong, in other words, I knew that, say, Ivan Payne was a priest in my class. I knew that he had done X, Y, Z here. We move him somewhere else. I really do not think there was an evil plot, but it's omission we're talking about. I move him to somewhere else and don't supervise the fact that he's not only saying Mass on Sundays, but looking after the altar boys or wherever the heck he was at in the parish where he continued to offend, then the person who moved him is in danger of being seen as an accessory after the fact. So he's also guilty for the crimes that Ivan Payne committed. I'm only mentioning him because he's completely in the public domain. So the only way I can rescue, just to talk about the debate for the moment, my side of it, would be that, well, if the church now does what Mannix has asked it to do, because as Mannix knows and has pointed out only too well, terrible as the evil deeds were that were done to the victims of these predators, even, it's hard to say, because of the greater responsibility of the less, if you like, perverse, because they weren't presumably moved by the same terrible push desires of these guys who didn't, as it were, deal with that effectively. So you got the cover up as well as the deed, and that's what we're facing. So to me, the only way the church cannot hinder in the areas that Mannix has done is to now repent and to make good, insofar as it's ever possible, what's happened there. Now, one point I would say, and it's not a debate because it's very, very difficult. I mean, Mannix's experience is unarguable against. I'm as shifted by it as everyone here was, I imagine. But one of the things you would say, and I think Mannix has said it and various other people on both sides have said it, is that a particular group who, in the name of a particular organisation, do terrible deeds, it doesn't mean that everyone in that organisation, and I think everyone's pointed that out. I have spent a lot of time working on Nazi stuff and translating stuff and so on and so forth, so I'm reasonably familiar with Holocaust literature and everything else. And one of the things you have to face then is, after 45, there was a film called We Are All Guilty, or something like that. A film came out about 46 or 47. What do we do with Germany? We don't abolish Germany, because not everyone, first of all, did it. Not everyone necessarily condoned the Holocaust, taking that as the major evil deed of Nazism. There are many other ones, but that's the major one in history. And so you have, in other words, we can quite accept that in the end of the day, German people, not necessarily, not going into the details of that argument, are all to blame for what happened under Hitler. And I'm trying to say the same for the Catholic Church. In fact, I would say quite straight, as far as I can see, I personally never came across. I remember it was before a discussion, Vincent Brown and Peter McVerry, two very different kinds of people with whom I disagree on about 115% of everything. Okay, but all of us agreed by our own encounters with the Catholic Church here, there and everywhere, we had never come across a case of abuse of that sort, nor heard of one. I'm just simply saying. I've got a doctorate in, of all things, psychology. I wish it was something decent like astrology. Imagine trying to get into the next life and saying you have a doctorate. I hope there's no one here who's got a doctorate in psychology. Anyway, be that as it may, I studied Freud, all that stuff. You come across almost nothing in the literature, nothing prepares you for. By the way, people are talking about being brainwashed. What on earth is wrong with having a clean brain? I mean, that's a little just point I would make very, very humbly and so on, but that's only by the way. So the big point then for me would be that one. It's not an argument, it's not an excuse. It's simply saying that because some people have acted in a horrible and terrible and evil way, everyone is to blame for that. That's a little bit coloured by, unfortunately, the fact that the public representatives, in many cases, both of religious orders and of dioceses, covered it up. So that makes it a little bit more difficult for me. At the same time, I would simply say, and this draws back on various things that various people, Kate and Thomas said, is the church is actually made up of everybody who is in it. And it's not just the hierarchy, it's not just the representatives. And there's an element which, as we do, if you've ever seen the show, for example, I think it's 13 TV programs, the guy who made it, Lanceman, interviewed guys at the signal boxes who drove the trains, who took the people to the various places. So how conscious, how collusive were various Polish people who were involved? You know, the question would be how many people knew about these terrible things? And it's at that level, I actually don't know. But it's at that level you would have to say, yes, you know, it's much, much wider than the individuals who did it. Anyone who condoned it in any way, they're part of it. But that is by no means everybody. Okay, just in terms of, if I was just thinking about the kind of problem that we had in Ireland, that effectively up to, say, 22, just approximately, you had a scenario where the church-state relationship was kind of adversarial. We certainly were not the established church. After 1870, there was no established church in Ireland. But effectively, the Catholic Church was not in a position of easy dominance. It possibly lived together with it more and more easily after people like Daniel O'Connell, who effectively was a great example to me of what a Catholic should be, because he also was open to people like Tom Paine. He didn't reject the French Revolution. So effectively, O'Connell said, if I was in England, I'm in Ireland, I'm fighting for the rights of Catholics. That was before 1829. If I was in England, I'd be fighting for the rights of Jews. If I was in Poland, I'd be fighting for the rights of Protestants. If I was in America, I'd be fighting for the rights of black people. In other words, a genuine universal attitude towards human rights, which I would hope would be that of any Christian, Catholic or whatever. But effectively, what we had after 22 was a church that worked along with the state. And Dermot Martin actually made this point, what the heck happened? And I think there was a kind of general anaesthetic in which many Catholics who were used to being on a slightly adversarial thing, which is always good for the soul, began to fall asleep. And because we painted, I've often pointed out to people who come to Ireland, look, you want to know what 1916-22 meant? Get to your average postbox. You'll see there VR, or very nicely Edward VII, and if you tap at it a bit with a screwdriver, under 3 layers of green paint, you'll find a bit of red. That was it, just a coat of paint, 3 coats of paint. In other words, it wasn't a huge radical change of people's attitudes at all. There were attempts by various people to do so. But effectively, what a lot of, I think, Catholics may have thought, now that we have our state, we don't have to try anymore. We don't have to be Christians anymore. We've made it. We've actually arrived at the heavenly Jerusalem, or the heavenly whatever it is. And so on. So I would say that uneasy moment, that uneasy period for me of a kind of collusion with the state and the state colluding with the church right through to the 1937 Constitution that various people have mentioned, right up to whenever you like, that period ended probably around 1970, who knows? Some program in the late, who knows, whatever it was. And now it's a different position. To some extent, some of the speakers are a little bit out of date, I would say. Because, in a certain sense, we don't have that position. I'm quite happy we don't have a position of power anymore. I don't want one. And I could come back, I think, to Thomas's point. It's up to us, if we have a case, to blink and well make it, to argue it, win it or lose it. That's all. Take, for example, the gay marriage thing that various people mentioned. The state of Maine last week or the week before voted it out. The state of California voted it out about 6 months earlier. Every single state in America. Now, Maine I mentioned because there's probably there are Catholics there, but it's not it's a typical white Anglo-Saxon Protestant type of part of America, very liberal. In other words, there are issues here that aren't necessarily Catholic. You may not agree with them, I do agree with them, but effectively they're not necessarily Catholic whatsoever. So I'm just trying to come back to the point again of the state of Ireland. I'd prefer not to take it. Well, okay, fire ahead.
It's all very fair to say that certain issues still have yet to be resolved, but the truth is that the Church perpetrated an absolutely skewed idea of sexuality, which you can't argue with. They placed themselves in Irish people's bedrooms and told them exactly what they could and couldn't do. And how can you regard that as anything else but hindering social progress, all the specific issues aside?
Okay, take John Paul II. He's a pope from 79, most of your lifetime, I guess. From 79 up to whenever he died, a couple of years ago. He spent his entire life working out a profound understanding of sexuality, all based on what on earth the church is anyway, which is a life of persons in communion with one another who are totally different and yet united by love. That's supposed to be what the Trinity is. And so effectively he has a huge rethink of the whole area of sexuality, which includes all the things that are mentioned here. You may or may not agree with it, but there's no way you can call it skewed. In other words, it's an understanding that I haven't found anywhere else. A really radical attempt. There's a whole line of stuff, if you want, it's called The Theology of the Body, and about 4 years, it's like a book that size, but it's effectively a re-exploration of what, in fact, human relationships are in terms of the life of the Trinity. I don't find anyone offering this. And in a certain sense, you could say, in a scenario where everyone here is quite aware of sexual exploitation, everybody of us, we're getting it in all directions and so on, you could say a civilization in which I am taught always to try, at least, to love the other person as myself and not for myself. So I try to love you for you and not for me. That's not exactly the worst idea in the world. And so effectively to work that out, all the implications of that, which include pretty well all the sexual areas mentioned, I would suspect here. Maybe the homosexual is another debate. But effectively, I don't think you'll find anybody. So I'd say, give yourself a weekend and just have a look at what John Paul II has written, and you'll find there, I would say, a profoundly thought through and mature exploration of that issue. But anyway, just to come on a bit, what are the kind of things that I get from the Catholic Church? One of the most obvious ones is the very fact that we can have, various people have a discussion. Just think of Iran, Khomeini's, or now it's not Khomeini's, Khamenei's Iran, and Tehran last summer with these debates and so on. So there is a profound thing we may take for granted, which is precisely the ability to sort out basic areas like church and state. Every now and then, you can find in history the church takes up too much of a position and it abuses its position. Every now and then it's the other way around, where the state runs a church. I would prefer one of, polite difference and discussion and problems, the very situation I find myself in Ireland today, that's the one I would prefer. But effectively, if we ever lose that differentiation between church and state, the enormous danger is the state becomes a kind of religion on its own. And there is certainly Islam, if there are any Muslims here, I'm not trying to walk on your toes, but it is a clear problem, certainly with Sharia, that you have to think through how we can develop a democracy in which we allow people who disagree with us to live and flourish in the same society. You've got to work on all that. So the distinction between church and state is one of those key areas, I would say, Christianity and the Catholic Church in Ireland, if you like, to blame for. Emmett Larkin, who's a famous historian, wrote about that in that period around the 1890s to 1920. He makes the point, if Ireland hadn't had a church, we generally speak of the power structure of the church as something bad, but nonetheless leave out the bad side, the misuse of it by maybe power-hungry individuals. The reality of the church was so great, he says, we were protected from having a kind of one-party, revolutionary, nationalist kind of dictatorship of the sort you got in Eastern Europe. You got a place like Hungary and Romania and so on during the 30s. You got it all over South America. Effectively, in Ireland, you got a much more developed thing where the state was powerful but was never able to, as it were, take over. It's a scenario I would always want to. So just to finish then, one of the kind of my experience of young people today who are trying to live within the church and so on is that they're much more different than I was. So for example, I'm at a meeting last week with a bunch of young people for a United World. A whole bunch of them went to India this summer. Some of them are Catholics, some of them are Sikhs, some of the Sikhs are born here, and so on and so forth. They have their turbans, the boys wear smaller turbans and so on and so forth. Then we have some Muslims who are the same group from Qatar. They're living in Ireland now, but the Qatari ones speak with Belfast accent, the Sikhs speak with Dublin accent, and these are young people who are very well able to work together with people of different religions and different viewpoints. So despite all the horror stories that I would have that are there, I would say the church's ability, when it has done something profoundly wrong, the things that Mannix spoke about. For example, even the movement of Dermot Martin to Dublin, a guy from Rome, doing what, and knows the value of having a head office which keeps an eye on a very failing church, is not at all a bad one. So that effectively we are trying to, in some way, I don't know if we've got there yet, we certainly haven't, but we at least are trying to repent and to make good and certainly never make the same mistakes again. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society, ladies and gentlemen. Just before I get into my speech, I'd like to second what you have said. Is basically, I do not believe that any priest will not be judged by God for his actions if he has done wrong. God judges all, the weak shall inherit the kingdom of heaven. That is the way it stands. Now, before I jump into sort of the serious discussion in my speech as to why the church in the future should put people first and God second, I want to get out of the way a quick point. Irish society is not in a good way. We are currently part of a culture whose international identity is belligerent drunkenness on the streets of the world. I wish to put it to you that anything that fought back the development of this culture is a good thing. When religion ruled at its height, we were an island of saints and scholars. We brought the pure form of Christianity back to Europe after the implosion of the Roman Empire. We used to be so much better than we are now. Instead, we have a culture where alcohol is king, the queen isn't queen, the president has little power, and the Taoiseach is failing epically in the eyes of his people. Irish society is hardly in a good place. The church is hindering this progress. But since I'm not talking about abuse, and I'm strictly talking about the changing of moral values over a long period of time, I believe that the hindering of societal change is in fact a good thing. I think the church's job, in a sense, as a traditional and ancient institution, is to look at the changes in society over a long period of time and to question them. Basically, I want to compare the church to, I don't have any ancient lore examples, so I'm going to go for Lord of the Rings. I want to compare the church to an Ent from Lord of the Rings. Okay, Treebeard says, don't be too hasty, little one. There's plenty of time for everything, Okay, now, the Church in Ireland, sorry, was therefore, fulfilling its job. It was questioning social change and making sure, it is questioning social change and making sure society doesn't follow crazy fads. And in fact, in 40 years' time, if society still holds the same views that it does now, the church should change to shift and sort of agree with them. And I'll get back to that in a minute. No. Basically, the church in Ireland failed in the past. Okay, they operated through a plan of fear. They laid on their beliefs on people. And I'm going to discuss why this doesn't work. It is my firm belief that the church should hold three things close to its heart. The first is the possibility of a spiritual dimension. That God exists cannot be questioned by the church, partly because it's their job, and partly because the existence of a spirituality can bring joy to people's hearts when there is none to be found. Therefore, the church must uphold this. God can be the light within the darkness and the hope when all hope has failed, which is why God is important to have as an option when things get really bad. The education of a spiritual dimension in this way falls to the church because the state has too much power to do it. When a government passes a law, says something is true, you have to believe it. It's the law. If you don't, you're going to jail. When the church says something is true, you can look at it, think, I like the sound of that, or no, that's not what I want. Now, the reason the church can do this is because it has enough authority that we listen to them, but at the moment, I need to get through this. At the moment, not so much authority that we take everything they believe to be true, which means that it can say things, because, to be honest, the church has a lot of free time on its hands that are morally maybe evaluated through this amount of free time, and then state them to society for judgment. And that is actually what I believe, because there's been a lot of talk of the past, and it's actually what I believe should be a shift for the future of the church. You see, I do not believe the church should be authoritarian. I think the church has authority within society because everyone in society understands some of the moral values that the church shares. Everyone has heard of the Ten Commandments. The church, therefore, has an authoritative voice, has been making moral calls for centuries, and I think that it will keep on doing so for many more millennia. Basically, I think that the church needs to readjust its moral thinking in a way that, in fact, means that it can still participate in modern debates in society. Because I look at the church and I see a problem. And I see that they are following the wrong path to morality. They are putting God before the very people that they hope to represent. No, thank you. It is my firm belief that God must serve its people first and God second. The days are gone that we believe in a judgmental God that punishes all people who don't believe in him. And now I'll admit there are loud minorities who believe in damnation for non-believers, but the quiet majority of Christianity does not. No, thank you. People do not feel the benevolent God would judge someone for asking the honest question about his existence and the trends of time. Now, I'm going to make a short theological aside, okay? If God is good, then the action God takes is good. The only action that most people can reasonably credit to God with no doubts is that of creation. Therefore, the only good act is that of creation. Since we can neither create or destroy matter, we are not capable of committing the sort of evil that God would object to, which means that any morality which he asks us to follow is then based on our fallacies, with them taken into full account. A good God with knowledge of our fallacies will judge this person in a second who does good deeds on the intent of their actions, not whether they accept the creed of belief in him, because that one imperfection is outweighed by the rest of their actions. Yes?
Forgive me if I'm wrong, but a second ago you were saying the church is so conservative that it won't change its views on abortion or contraception. But now you're saying, in fairness, they should probably change their views on God.
No. Actually, the church changes its views on pretty much everything. It just takes a long time to do it. And the church's views on God are in fact shifting as we speak. And this is in fact what the majority of people believe. Now, basically, the church must serve its people because it's mandated by God. It must educate them to be good citizens, to help other people, and to be kind. Because in this way they earn God's love, and equally they are healthy contributing members of our society. The message of the church must change completely, because at the moment it says, do this, because if not, you will burn. Because morality taught through fear is not morality. Okay? If you have fear behind one of your actions, then you choose that fear out of a necessary survival instinct, and not actually because that's the choice that is truly good for you to take. Fear is not the tool of people who wish to remain respected, it is the tool of short-lived tyrants, which is why the Irish church failed in the duration of sort of when it was in charge and in control of the state, because it used fear, and through that, its period was short-lived, and now no one respects it. So basically, what is useful must be kept, and what is useless must be cast away. It works like this. Churches should be slow to change. They should be standing there at the back, questioning everything that society undertakes, because they have a weight of tradition under which to evaluate things. But, over a long period of time, if society says one thing, and the church is standing there saying another, which everyone considers outdated, then the church loses its authority to debate moral issues in the public sphere, which means that actually it's compromising its sole duty, which is to be spiritual and moral educators of the people. Now, because of this, any belief that society views as being ridiculously outdated should be cast aside, as was done with slavery. And then the church will change. And if it doesn't do this, it will become outdated and no more respected as an educator. So in fact, all of its views are temporary. All of its views are subject to change. All of them should be, so it can remain respected, updated, and basically people will still go to it for moral advice. Otherwise, what do you have to do? And the reason I've said all this to you today in this debate is this is what the church should have done in Ireland instead of using fear. It is the alternative. It is what the church should do in Africa today. Now, we need to make this statement to the church and breathe new life into the graveyards of our past. I beg you to propose this motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Mr. Auditor, ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society, ladies and gentlemen. I have spoken here 15 to 18 times, which says something for me. And I've spoken about things that are pretty close to my heart. This is the speech. I have never been as uncomfortable about giving a speech as this one. Because while I am willing to stand by most of my views, in Ireland today, I am ashamed to stand up and say that I'm a Catholic. Because like everyone else, pretty much in this country, I feel like I have been personally hurt, victimised and betrayed by the Catholic Church. And so I think that I should lay out, as I start, that I am trying to convince myself as much as I'm trying to convince the rest of you. And that's not based on a church hierarchy. That's based on a kind of uncertain belief in something that hopefully transcends that church hierarchy. I can't put my finger on it, but hopefully it's there. That said, I am not ashamed of being a shameless Lord of the Rings nerd. The Ents slowed down moral progress and skewed sexuality to the point that they lost their women and never had sex again. That was a bad analogy. So I want to talk first of all about this question of social progress and what it is that brings social change. Because I kind of asked this question of Mannix Flynn. I think that yes, the church committed atrocities. I think that yes, the church should be ashamed of itself. But I think that this country should be ashamed of itself. I think with regard to the reality of child abuse, yes, it happened. Yes, the church tried to hide it, but so did the rest of us. There is no way that there was no parent of this country who knew what their child was going through. There is no way that representatives of the state did not know what these children were going through, and they didn't bring the change either. They didn't tell the guards. They did not force the issue. This was a national failing. And yes, I think the church should take responsibility, but I think by virtue of the fact that we are pointing to the church, that we are abrogating responsibility from ourselves, that we hinder this social change further. Because I think that one of Ireland's great failings is kind of a variation on the concept of national amnesia that's quite common, like among people who discuss the issue of nationality. And the idea is that you can't progress as a nation if you remember all of the horrible things that have been done in the history of your nation. I think Ireland takes this one step further. I think Ireland, in its everyday life, purposefully ignores what is going on in this country. And I think that that is what has restricted social change. It's the fact that we weren't willing to look for change. We weren't willing to call up the church on its failings. We weren't willing to call up ourselves on our failings. And I think that we're continuing that process now by virtue of the fact that we're still not willing, no thank you, to take national responsibility. Like the government, on the day it was supposed to be debating the Ryan report, switched it for a vote of no confidence within their petty political games. I think it's about time that as a country we recognised that we impeded social progress, we hindered social progress, and it was not just the Catholic Church. Basically, I am sick of the Leaving Cert history examples that we've gotten from the prop today. They've been like mother and child scheme and 1913 lockout. What brings social change is the process
of social change. And as I said in a point of information, when the people voted for divorce, we had divorce. When the people supported legalising homosexuality, no thank you, homosexuality was legalised. We could have called them up, we could have brought change, and we didn't. And that responsibility is ours, and I think we should stop trying to pass it off. The church has taken steps. I don't think it's taken enough steps, but the church is carrying out reports, is admitting its failings, and is facing those failings. And I think it's coming out stronger on the other side as a result. I think it is a better church. I don't think that the state has done the same thing. Thomas.
I think there's a little bit of difficulty though if you're like, say, I may not support gay marriage, like if I'm threatened with excommunication and hell, like you don't really have the option to change your mind if you're Catholic or a politician. You're threatened with like social annihilation.
I don't understand this idea that like the priests were there going, you're going to go to hell, and that's what we're going to tell you. And we know that's not true, but it's what we're telling you anyway. The priests believed that being gay was wrong. The priests believed that these people were going to hell, and that is what they told them. That is what they publicised. They were trying to save souls. No, thank you. We have to ask this question. Like, what is the church? The church is its congregation. The church is priests. And the priests, like of the past, weren't necessarily people with this high moral standing. They were people who were forced to give up normal lives because they were the oldest son and you had to have a vocation in the family. And yes, no thank you, these people did not deal well with their responsibility. These people did not uphold their responsibility. But we have to stop drawing this false dichotomy between the church and the people. They're one and the same, and they share the same responsibility. No thanks. But the second, no thank you, no thanks. Big thing that I want to get onto is like that we've heard all this stuff about if the church was a political party, if the church was a political regime, we wouldn't vote for them. Like, then why do we? Why is the church still here? Like, we have a choice now, and we still see that people go to Mass. We still see that people go to knock in their droves, even when herself isn't there. And we still see that people care, that things like the Pope's visit were some of the most significant moments in the history of this country. And that's because people still believe. Like, Fintan might call it Stockholm Syndrome, like, you could otherwise call it faith. And I think we have to accept, like, I know they're frighteningly similar. I think we have to accept that, like, the Catholic Church is always going to fail. Because whether you believe it or not, on paper the aim of any church, of any religion, is for humans to do the will of God. They are setting themselves up to fail. We have to accept that. But I think that the church has made social progress. Like, I think that there are deeper things than, like, abortion or divorce. I think that, like, Christianity, when it was formed and continues to be, a deeply progressive mindset, like charity, good deeds, community, family. These things are socially progressive. These are deep-set social goods. And yes, the higher echelons did disallow divorce, even when husbands were beating their wives. But I think that in many situations, the person who was consoling that wife was the local priest. Like, we heard from Mannix Flynn that the church hasn't done anything, like, to deal or to take responsibility for the issues raised around child abuse. Like, I was deeply affected by these issues, and the only place that I've gotten solace with regard to them was in a church, when an ordinary priest was willing to stand up and say that yes, there was a failing, yes, we are sorry, and yes, we are willing to do better. I think that yes, the threat of hell was used to frighten people, but at the same time, the threat of heaven was the promise of heaven was used to console people, and was used to uplift them, and was used to do what it is that religion is supposed to do, which is to raise people's lives to a higher level, to make them believe, to give them faith. That is socially progressive, that is socially important, and that transcends the politics, that transcends the social progression, and that will continue on into the future. And so I move to oppose. Thank you.
Our next speaker for proposition is Anthony McDonald.
Mr. Chairperson, Auditor, ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society, ladies and gentlemen. Right. I want to deal first of all with this idea of motivation. We've heard this whole idea from the off, that the church did these things because they believed it was right. We heard this idea from Niamh, that they told people they're going to hell because they're gay, because they genuinely believe they're going to hell because they're gay. And I don't disbelieve that. I think that's true. They did do what they thought was best for the country. But that doesn't mean that they didn't hold back the social progress. That doesn't mean it didn't make it harder for gay people to come out and be who wanted to be. In a sense, motivation here is irrelevant due to the motion. Like, the point is that regardless of whether they had a moral duty, regardless of whether there are moral reasons behind stopping people coming out because they're gay, they did eventually stop people coming out because they're gay. And ladies and gentlemen, I have a problem with this, and I think it held back our social progress. Now, I want to move on to like this whole idea of social progress. Like it's a generally accepted view amongst historians and academics. I'm a history student. That like women's rights got worse in 1922. These are the college examples rather than the Leaving Cert ones. That women's rights got worse after 1922. Like just because basic ideology, things like the removal of things like divorce, and basically a greater acceptance that women's place was in the home. And I think that's bad. I think that's something that we have to look at, and that's our social progress going backwards, something that wasn't reversed till the 60s. Like things like the Madeline women, which one of our guests brought up, were apparent in our society, and we're a thing due to the church, where women got pregnant is immediately her fault, that the woman is immediately put under a greater burden, immediately more difficult for them to get pregnant, for them to make a mistake. And that hurt our social progress, that hurt the fact that we moved forward, that made it more difficult for women to achieve certain things in society, and that created a massive disparity between us and other countries due to women's rights, which happened after the 1921. Like you say, yes, like government was to blame for this. Yes, the people were to, no thank you, yes, the people were to blame for this. Yes, we all accepted it, but it happened, and it was made worse by the fact that the church put it there. It was made worse by the fact that the church was there saying, yeah, women were bad, running things that took women, separated their women from their children at birth because they weren't married, ladies and gentlemen. And I think that's bad, and I think that held women back in our society, and I think that held people back in our society, and that hindered our progress, ladies and gentlemen. And for that reason alone, I propose the motion column.
Okay, the church told us that those women were social progressives and we loved it. The church told us to stop drinking and we ignored them.
Yeah, because they told us to do something. It's much easier, if a church tells you that those people are wrong, then it's easy to go, those people are wrong. If the church tells you to do something, then it's an entirely different thing to do because they're making you change your life. And so it turned us against other people in our society, but it couldn't turn us against ourselves, Colm. Yes, you're right. And we say like this, and I don't think this would have happened to the extent it happened in the church, and I think that held back our social progress and it held out inequality in our society. Like we've got this idea from Niamh and Niamh like divorce would have happened, only happened when the people allowed it to happen. And I said, yeah, that's true. Divorce did happen when the people allowed it to happen, and it didn't happen before they allowed it to happen. But the point is, divorce was, people had to wait till 1995 and a rainy day in the West before they allowed it to happen, before they were willing to accept something like divorce, primarily because of an institution like the church. Like, the church ran our education systems, and it created this idea that you shouldn't question it, that what it was telling you is right, what it was telling you should follow. And so people got into the society and they didn't question it. No, thank you, Niamh. They didn't question the ideas it put forward, ladies and gentlemen, and that's why we got things like divorce, and that's why we stopped social progress, because if the church said something, you generally inclined to believe it because that's what your teacher told you, and that's what your parents told you, and that's what your priest told you, and after all, isn't your priest normally right, always right? And we think by stopping, even stopping people by going to things like this fine institution, the greatest college in our country, and people weren't allowed to go to if they were college because the church said so, and we think that stopped the discourse. Like things like the Late Show when that came up was hugely opposed behind the scenes by the Catholic Church because it questioned things like sexuality and who we are and what we want to be, ladies and gentlemen. And when they went against the church doctrine, the church was against it, and we opposed that, and the church opposed that, and that stopped discourse, and that stopped us being able to discuss these things. So, ladies and gentlemen, for all those reasons and many more, I beg you to propose. Thank you.
Bear with me. Mr. Chair,
Mr. Auditor, ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to talk to you about three things. I want to talk to you about responsibility, I want to talk to you about morality, and I want to talk to you about Finbarr. I'm going to talk about Finbarr first. I wasn't originally planning on speaking. I'm not a Christian. I think I come from a general sense, a Catholic family. I am, like Finbarr, a theology student. Apparently, like Finbarr, I know slightly more about the church. The reason I say this is it was Finbarr's opening, well, not opening now, but the first thing I wrote down was, the church should put people first and God second. I think, no. The church tries to bring people to God by getting people to obey God's will. Think that if you give the church any other duty, it stops being an effective church. And this is going to be the least structured part of my speech because I just wrote things down as they annoyed me. He talked about the church should be about societal change. It should give up its moral authority and start thinking about how it can change society. I think, no, the church shouldn't give up its moral authority, and I'll talk about why in a moment. But what it should do with its time isn't think about how it can change society. It's think about how it can save souls. Traditionally, we call that theology, Finbarr. We think that actually, cat's got claws. Think that actually, the idea that the church should go and do things that it thinks are not actually morally correct because society thinks so is ridiculous. The church should do things in a way which it considers to be morally correct and, most importantly, consistent with the teachings of Christ. We think that the idea that it should be, some kind of social changer beyond that role is ridiculous. Obviously, as Niamh said, I think that the Christian movement has always been revolutionary. The Christian movement is a good thing that is always changing. But the idea that they should change things outside of those parameters, outside of what they actually think God will approve of, is just silly. Go.
So if the church should, try and stick to things that are its own business, do you think that the church in Ireland did go beyond that and did go to things that weren't its business, and were there any negative consequences?
I don't think it went beyond its business. I think its business is saving souls. The way you do that is you tell people, you use that moral authority that you have to make sure people do good things. I don't agree with all the things they did, but that's one of the reasons I'm an atheist. I think that actually, if the church, for the church to encourage you, or not encourage you to do good things, is a misuse of the power that we gave it. No thanks. Now, I suppose, is there anything else? No. Responsibility. Fintan said this thing that, if the church was a party, we wouldn't vote for it. I think that the point is that we did vote for it. We voted for it every time we voted for a government that put church values first. We stopped voting for it at the point at which we started abandoning those values. I think there's a the responsibility here, that the one that Niamh identified, is with society. Yes, obviously the church, when there were abuses, the church was responsible for it. But equally, there was a society that knew it was letting that happen. There was a society that refused to believe it was happening. There was a society that ignored all of those things. That society that gave up responsibility, we think at that point, that the society became as culpable as the church. Yeah, sure.
Okay. The church tried to legislate against sin in banning homosexuality. Do you think it's okay for an institute to legislate against sin?
Okay, I don't think the church tried to legislate against sin. I think the government tried to legislate against sin using their moral norms. And this is my third point. This idea of morality. We've been given this idea, and it's inherent in the motion, this idea of progress. That morality is a constant, that there's one kind of morality that's good, and that the past was wrong. I don't think that's true, and I don't think they've given us a justification for why. There is no such thing as bad morals. This idea of skewed views of sexuality doesn't make sense. They had the views of sexuality were the views held by that society and views held by those people. They can't be inherently wrong. They can be ones that we disagree with, but that's not the same thing as wrong. This idea we were given of brainwashing doesn't make sense because what that is teaching. There is no X model for human that has a certain set of moral codes that they tricked and that they got rid of. They raised people under the beliefs that society thought was acceptable, and because of that society continued to give power to through the church. But it is irresponsible for someone who has that moral authority to do anything else. I said this to Anthony for information, that the church, like they told us to make pariahs out of various people in society, and we loved that and we went for it. But when the church told us things like don't drink or don't drink too much, when it told us things like love thy neighbour, we ignored them. I think that actually there's more to this than just, well, it's like Anthony's answer was, it's easy to hate people and they shouldn't encourage us to do that. I don't think they did try to encourage us to hate people. But beyond that, the responsibility lies on us. If we can ignore the good things and take in the things that we now view as bad, then I don't see how the responsibility is on the church and not on the people who chose to ignore all of the good values the church gave us and chose to take only that which they could skew and use for their own petty and malicious needs. For those reasons, I would urge you to oppose this motion.
Thank you, Colm. I think that is our final speaker. So I think now it's time to put the motion to the floor. And could all those in favour of the motion please say aye? Aye! All those against the motion say nay? Nay! Okay, I think it seems that the ayes have it. So before we start, can I just briefly thank the Historical Society for their very kind invitation to me to be here this evening. Certainly it was a great pleasure to hear the speeches, some very entertaining as well as very enlightening comments. I especially like the references, the breadth of the references from starting off with Oisin to Lord of the Rings and then a revisionist presentation of Lord of the Rings. So that was very grateful. That was very enlightening. So in that sense, again, I'm so grateful to the Historical Society for the invitation and also their hospitality. I'm not sure if people know what hospitality means. Hospitality is when you welcome someone to your home, even though you wish to go they were back in their own home. So I'm very grateful all around, and I would like to congratulate them on the kind of appropriateness of the motion, because since the Divine Report has been mentioned a number of times, and we are at an important crossroads for Christianity, and particularly the Catholic Church in Ireland today. So I do think the timing of the motion was excellent. Apart from one technical detail, small detail, that the next time you're having a motion for this, can you please not have it the night of Ireland's most important circular? With that in mind, trying to bring together all the threads of the motion tonight is not an easy task by any means. And I suppose what struck me about it was that sometimes it struck me that the opposition were making the case for the proposition and the proposition were making the case for the opposition. And I think that is very revealing, because it shows just how complex the motion is and how much a nuanced response is required to this kind of idea. Having said that, I do think the proposition had a number of kind of convincing weapons in their arsenal, if you like. And I think I do think from the very start we heard a lot about the role of women and the place of women. And I think and then we heard a bit about sin and interesting parallels with Stockholm syndrome, which I hadn't expected to come across this evening. But I do think that is an issue which has certainly, the Catholic Church has not a good record on. And as someone who belongs to the Catholic Church myself, I don't think it is hard to. I don't too much of one type of Catholicism and maybe not enough Christianity. And I think that's, I think Mannix's story kind of illustrates that. Very early on, Fintan talked about the kind of nice priests. This is something that I would know from experience. I think Fintan was a little bit dismissive maybe of their contribution. But I suppose when we talk about the church, we have to recognise that the church in Ireland has many faces. And, while there are obviously people who have done horrific things, and there has been a culture of concealment when it comes to abuse. Equally though, there have been many people in the Catholic Church who have definitely contributed to social progress in Ireland. I think of people like Father Peter McVerry, people like Sister Stanislaus Kennedy, who have been very much at the coalface when it comes to social progress in looking at issues like homelessness, for example. I think of someone like Bishop Willie Walsh down in Clare, who was someone who, when it comes to talking about travellers, didn't just talk the talk, he walked the walk. He told the travellers to come in and you can camp in my grounds. I think just kind of find it interesting that, for instance, his own driver is a traveller, which just a small thing perhaps, but I think it's significant. And I do think that one of the things that the church sometimes, just as it has given us a lot of people we should be ashamed of, and a culture more, I think, than people we can at times be ashamed of, it has given us people who can inspire us, who I certainly find inspiring in some ways. But unfortunately, these people are often, I think maybe their contribution is often lost because of if you like, the sins of the institution. And again, I think that the proposition made a very strong case on the idea of, it's interesting, Brendan spoke about a mission. And again, I thought Brendan made the case for the proposition very well in that point. And unfortunately, when it came to questions of injustice, I do think, as we've heard tonight, the church did keep aloof, and keeping aloof ultimately involves complicity. I felt the debate was very nuanced, as I mentioned, and like Mother Teresa was quoted, for instance, and her opposition to divorce. But equally, like, no matter what we might think about that, I do think we do have to recognise that here was a woman who, every day of her life, held someone who was homeless, who was a victim of AIDS or whatever, who was lonely,
Dr. Mannix Flynn and Dr. Hindered. Just if anyone had filled in their order returns, they can hand them to Bella on the way out, so that we can tag them up at the end of the year. Next week's debate is a maidens competition. I don't think the motion has been announced, but it will be the finest first year's debating one of the issues towards the final. The competition has been running for the last 4 weeks, and it should be very engaging. Anybody else interested in debating who wants to go on a trip away, regardless of if you reach the latest final. I realise people want to get to Ireland, to the Ireland-France match. If they want to go to the Cork, the sign-up sheet will be up